For the last few decades, video games have become one of the world's most beloved pastimes. Within them lies the power to become someone else, to venture to new worlds and save or conquer them as we see fit. To us, we who have become dragon slayers, space marines, heroes of the realm, these experiences will stay with us and bolster us in darker times. But this power isn't magic. It's an ability that's been passed down since our ancestors sat around a fire and told stories to each other. It's an ability born in words and song, laid upon paper and translated into film. This is the ability to lose yourself in a world and its characters, caught up in its intrigue. Video games represent the next step, a digital tradition, and it's a potent one. But it's not yet widely accepted.
I'm your host, James Taber, and today I'd like to welcome you to Video Game Literature, the show where we examine the literary merit of video games. For those of you like me, it may be hard to understand why this topic needs to be addressed. We grew up with video games. We've been comforted, cheered, and inspired by their stories for years. Being an interactive medium allows these games to provide players an unprecedented level of depth and to do so in a more direct fashion than how novels and films have been doing for centuries. They don't just show us a story, they make us part of it. But the truth is that the ability for video games to convey the breadth of emotion equivalent to that of a book or a movie is a recent one. It needs to be carefully observed and nurtured as it grows, because games weren't always like this. They were more like this.
At their inception, video games were more conventionally pastimes than they are now. Arcade games and early console offerings didn't have any of the trappings of what makes up literature. Instead, you played the game just for the game's sake, trying to get a high score, or at least a higher score than your friends. They had little to no atmosphere, and aside from developing the skills you needed to win, they were mindless. Even when gaming made the move to the home console, few games were able to offer a story as part of their experience. The best a player could hope for was a little backstory in the manual that came with the game. The importance of story and character development didn't really catch on until the turn of the century. That isn't to say that there were no games with story in them before then. The burgeoning genre of role-playing games required a story and character arcs. Games like Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, and Phantasy Star broke new ground in the medium, and though they had straightforward controls, the length of the games were sometimes a stumbling block to gamers, particularly casual ones.
At this point, we should probably delve into what literature is, since the concept's a bit nebulous. There are several definitions out there, but we can narrow it down to the two most common ones. 1. Anything written and printed for the sake of entertainment and/or education, especially on a particular subject. And 2. Creative works considered to have a superior or enduring artistic merit. Obviously, that first definition isn't going to do us much good when discussing video games. It's the second one we'll be spending most of our time with, especially the bit about artistic merit. So what is artistic merit? It's how you judge whether something is art or isn't. Not so much whether art is good or bad. The question of video games being art is still contested. But I'll summarize Jerry Holkins by saying it seems impossible for dozens of artists to collaborate on a project for 2 or 3 years and have the outcome not be art. With that in mind, the question becomes whether or not video games have artistic merit that's either superior or enduring. This is where the concept of literature gets tricky, because what's superior and enduring for one person may not be superior and enduring for someone else. Think about your favorite book, the one you read when you were a child that's followed you for your entire life. It made you cry and laugh, and made it feel like you weren't in your own world anymore. You forgot everything when you read it, regardless of whether the book was actually any good. For me, that book was The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. Reading about the awesome and terrible things waiting for us on other worlds took me on a journey every time. It still does. For you, it could have been Harry Potter, or Junior Jedi Knights, or anything by Bruce Coville. Maybe you loved a cartoon or a television show, or there was a movie with a character you wanted to be when you grew up. Provided you haven't spent your life just reading and watching the same things over and over again, you've experienced this feeling dozens of times now from a variety of sources. That is a superior and lasting artistic merit, and that is what can be found in video games. When you find artistic merit within the story of a work, that's called literary merit. For simplicity's sake, we can say that literary merit is derived from 3 distinct categories: plot, character, and setting. When you have a deep and insightful plot, characters who grow and change over time, and a meaningful setting, you get something that people can see as literature. But you need all three, and all three have to be obviously present. Any story that lacks one of those three can still be entertaining, but it won't challenge us at our core and make us face ourselves, which is the goal of literature. In video games, however, there's another hurdle. Those three elements have to work with a fourth, gameplay. In the end, they have to overwhelm it, make it feel like you're not playing a game, much like you can forget you're reading a book or watching a movie. The narrative has to surpass the gameplay. And with that nugget of wisdom, let's take a look at a few examples of games that definitely aren't literature.
Back in the day, Sonic the Hedgehog was Sega's mascot and main franchise. These fast-paced games let you navigate colorful worlds at high speed, collecting rings and battling robots. On a personal note, Sonic 2 on the Sega Genesis was the first video game I ever owned, so the nostalgia is pretty great here. If you didn't foster an obsession with the blue hedgehog and all of his merchandise and spin-off material, like I did, you might not be aware that there's a backstory to the games. The evil Dr. Robotnik has kidnapped all of Sonic's animal friends and turned them into robot slaves. So Sonic is battling to free his friends and prevent Robotnik from turning the whole world into robots. Also, there are Chaos Emeralds that do stuff, and for some reason Robotnik wants them. Yeah, it's not really well explained in the manual either. You can be forgiven for not knowing this because the story is presented exactly nowhere in the game itself. Like most games from that era, it was designed so you can just plug in the cartridge, pick up the controller, and play. No cutscenes, no backstory, nothing. Just keep going to the right until you reach the end of the level. The opening of Sonic 3 has one of the few vignettes that offer any sort of story. Here, we can see Sonic getting ambushed by Knuckles, who steals the Chaos Emeralds from him and runs off. This scene takes place entirely without dialogue or any meaningful interaction, aside from Knuckles sucker-punching Sonic.
You can argue that this scene, and others like it that happen throughout the game, offer a sort of rudimentary story, but it's still limited by the aspects of gameplay. The direction that Knuckles runs away, that's the only direction you can go. The game won't let you go left, you can only go to the right. And there's no deeper interaction, like dialogue between the characters. The truth is, Sonic games lack any coherent plot that actually matters, even if there is some character development as Knuckles over time discovers the error of his ways.
Another classic is Rare's Banjo-Kazooie, a lighthearted romp through a collectathon world. Unlike Sonic, the story in Banjo-Kazooie is very much present in the game itself. You play as Banjo, a bear on a quest to rescue his little sister Tooty from the evil witch Gruntilda. In novel form, this is a classic setup for the hero's journey, one of the oldest story forms known to man. In this example, the story isn't only present, it's important. It provides a motivation for the characters and the player, partly in the form of Gruntilda's incessant rhyming taunts. So why isn't this literature? Well, it's because of the characters. You can't have a plot without characters, but as this game proves, you can have characters without character development. Throughout the entire game, all the characters remain flat and static. They don't arc, and everyone is exactly who they appear to be from the beginning. Banjo and Kazooie never explore their feelings for each other, or if these feelings indeed exist. Tooty doesn't get the chance to escape before her brother shows up. Bottles is never forced to step outside his comfort zone of tutorial character and play hero. Mumbo doesn't turn out to be a double agent of the witch. Without proper character development, any literary merit the story might have otherwise had is severely diminished.
For this next game, when I say it's not literature, you'll think I'm being obvious. After all, it lacks any sort of story or characters, let alone the chance to develop them. In fact, you'll probably say that the only strong element this game has is setting. And even then, you'd be wrong.
If you guessed I'd be talking about Minecraft, congratulations! You got it. Minecraft by indie developer Notch is the open-ended game with no story and a massive, procedurally generated world. The only point is to survive the game's myriad monsters and avoid starving to death. There's no narrative structure to speak of except what you yourself create. You can do anything or nothing, just like real life. So yes, you're correct in that Minecraft has no story or characters, let alone character development. But what I want to draw your attention to is the failure of the setting. You see, a setting isn't just the place where the story happens. The setting has to have an immediate effect on the narrative itself. It provides an atmosphere and a context, and Minecraft is specifically without context. Sure, you can find villages and strongholds, but none of these suggest a story. They're all procedurally generated, which means the computer makes them up as the player finds them. In both Sonic and Banjo-Kazooie, setting was a vital part of their games. Their levels were vibrant and offered unique challenges for the player, and thus the hero, to overcome. But in Minecraft, the setting completely lacks any defining or unique challenges. It creates no atmosphere. There's weather, but at the very worst it's a minor inconvenience because it messes up your screen. That's not enough to grant any sort of literary merit to the setting.
There you have it. 3 modern classics beloved by many with nary a shred of literary merit to their names. None of them had a narrative that could surpass gameplay. And what do we get when a game like this fails the test? A damn good game.
The important thing to remember is that games, like movies or books, don't have to give you a life-changing experience to be enjoyable. For every piece of literature you've enjoyed in your life, there's been things that are decent, mediocre, and bad. There have probably been bad, awful, even trashy things that you've enjoyed. Literature is about personal values being reflected back at us through what we experience. It inspires feelings of joy, sorrow, and fear. It reaffirms our life choices and questions the nature of what we think is true. We find literature in narrative because that's how we live our lives, from one moment to the next. But it gives us something we can almost never find when we analyze our own lives: continuity, focus, and significance. We want to see those things for ourselves, be the heroes in our lives, and literature gives us that escape to a massive degree. Once you peel back all the trappings of academia and art school pretense, that's all literature is. Games that don't have that deep connection to their players will always have a place, but as we move into an era when games can engage us on that level, we have to remember to hold those ambitious games to the higher standard we hold for all literature. There are always those who contest any given work's status as literature, such as Harry Potter, both the novels and the films. But if you want your favorite video games, the ones that speak to your heart in a language that's both intimate and terrifying, you have to stand your ground and defend it. Even, maybe, if it's kinda bad.
Over the course of the show, we'll be analyzing contemporary games and drawing conclusions on whether or not they should be taken as literature, based on the criteria of plot, character, and setting. We'll also take into account whether or not the narrative surpasses the gameplay. Until then, game hard, game safe. Thanks for watching. The discussion continues in comments below, so feel free to join us. If you like our show, please like and subscribe. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter, or even send us an old-fashioned email.